We are Maria, Sietke and Simone from the Radboud University, and in various projects we are working together to give voice to the social aspects of the energy transition. In this video we take you on a journey towards the relationship between the principles of justice, future thinking and the role of narrative to visualize the impact of the energy policies for citizens. The latest IPCC report that was released this summer shocked the world. We really need to stop climate change and limitize the impact of our human behavior. The Netherlands, a small and innovative country in Europe that is, unfortunately, at the bottom of the Paris Agreement goals. The Dutch government always invested in gas in Groningen, coal in Limburg and steel in IJmuiden. And they now aim to CO2 neutrality in 2050. The Netherlands translated the Paris Agreement into a national climate agreement, as in practice the energy transition is an extensive transition for the built environment. The Netherlands is now divided in 30 energy regions that have to come to terms regarding the energy strategy for the built environment to become CO2 neutral in 2050. Although the built environment also includes industry, transport and other sectors, the Dutch government foresees a large role for citizens in achieving its goals. This means that households need to implement energy-efficient measures. This is an extensive task.
However, this energy transition faces a number of societal problems. First, the climate agreement explicitly emphasizes that citizens play a pivotal role in reaching the governmental goals to reduce CO2 emissions. However, citizens have not been included in the decision-making process. Their desires, concerns, expectations and fears were only indirectly considered based on the assumptions of policymakers and experts. So, even though they have to play a critical role, they had little influence on shaping this role so that it fits their own preferences and capabilities. Second, studies have shown that not everyone will be able to finance CO2-saving measures. In general, the number of energy-poor households is projected to increase from around 650,000 in 2018 to around 1.5 million in 2030. Energy poverty is hereby understood as households that have to spend more than 10% of their income on energy. These numbers, however, neglect the issue of hidden energy poverty, namely when households decide not to make use of energy services in order to lower costs, even if it might cause health issues. Therefore, we assume that the energy transition in the Netherlands may increase energy poverty, or as we prefer, energy vulnerability. We don't use the term energy poverty, but prefer the term energy vulnerability. Energy vulnerability stresses that households are energy service poor. That means they are deprived of energy services, such as heating, cooling, cooking, drying, or washing. Because of this deprivation, they cannot satisfy their elementary needs. Energy vulnerability is influenced by a number of complex factors that reinforce each other, such as high costs for energy, low income, inefficient houses or technologies, households' special needs for indoor climate, such as elderly demanding a higher indoor temperature, as well as other political, physical and institutional factors. Our findings confirm the dynamic and fluid dimension of energy vulnerability. Even citizens that are house owners can end up in problematic situations as they do not have enough savings or their houses are not suitable to implement CO2 reducing measures like solar panels or heat pumps. As the energy prices are rising, citizens have to deal with the burden of the energy transitions and are at risk of becoming energy service poor in the future.
We approach this energy justice dilemma from a futures perspective, not only because the energy transition is something that we are creating at the moment for the future, but also because it's expected that energy justice and especially energy vulnerability is an issue that increases over time. Time, as such, is the linking pin between action, motivation, desires, and expectations. This figure of Sarpong visualizes the relations very clearly. A nice quote of Sarpong is, "When our efforts instrumentally and rationally focused on one dimension of time, say the future, we miss the opportunities to probe both the past and sometimes the present adequately, leading to the identification of simple futures and incoherent potentialities and limits." In other words, Sarpong stresses that it is important to take the past, the present, and the future into account when thinking about urgent issues.
The bridge between different futures and the present lies in what people tell each other and how these narratives grow from individual towards collectively accepted imaginations of what is going to happen. This also causes group actions or resistance. If we are talking about energy justice, we urge to include more narratives and stories towards energy vulnerability, as this visualizes the impact of energy policies in practice. Policymakers and citizens have different ideas about the futures they expect, what they desire, and what they are uncertain about. Our assumption is that if the anticipated futures of citizens and policymakers do not align, energy vulnerability might be increased.
The question is, how do policy future narratives on energy relate to future narratives that are important to citizens' everyday life in the Netherlands? A narrative approach had been chosen to conduct a comparative analysis between a set of policy documents and the narratives of 30 local citizens. Analytically, our research combines insights from future studies and energy justice. This innovative combination allows us to be sensitive to the normative elements in the future narratives. Energy justice distinguishes three concepts: recognition justice, procedural justice, and distributive justice. Recognition justice stresses that the rights, needs, and desires of particular vulnerable groups, such as elderly, low-income households, ethnic minorities, or gender, need to be actively acknowledged and respected. Procedural justice evaluates the fairness of decision-making processes, focusing on a number of criteria, such as inclusion and influence. Distributive justice describes the allocation or fair distribution of future burdens and benefits, for example, financial burdens. It also analyzes the redistribution to minimize these negative consequences, for example, through governmental subsidies.
Future studies distinguishes between three different types of future studies: forecasting, foresight, and backcasting, the desired future. For this study, 2 out of 3 are relevant: the expected future and the desired future. The desired future is a future that we long for. Looking from the present, we imagine a desired future, and then we formulate different routes to reach this desired future. The expected future is a future that we expect to happen based upon trends that we see now and we saw in the past. So it's an extrapolation of issues that are relevant now, which we see in the future as well.
We identified several future narrative mismatches, which can be distinguished into 2 main types. First, opposing mismatches, where policy narratives and narratives of citizens anticipate antagonistic futures, and disconnected mismatches, where the mismatch emerges because the narratives do not engage with each other and focus on different issues. These mismatches of anticipated futures might create challenges for the implementation of the energy transition, characterized by just decision-making and fair distribution of burdens and benefits. First, an example of a disconnected mismatch. We found an example of the disconnected mismatch in the desired future of policymakers and citizens. Whereas policy focuses very specific on nationally carbon neutrality and cost efficiency as leading goals desires in the energy transition, citizens have a much more local focus, which however is much broader and comprehensive. They want a clean, safe and green living environment. This mismatch may cause issues for the distributive justice in the future, as citizens may experience and value the distribution of burden and benefits in the context of the energy transition differently than the focus of policy. Secondly, an example of an opposing mismatch. An example of an opposing mismatch is the policy narrative wants to achieve these goals via collective neighborhood approach, which is based on active participation and co-creation of citizens. In other words, citizens are supposed to play a leading role. However, this narrative is an opposing mismatch with the narratives of citizens in two ways. First, the narrative of citizens demonstrate that taking responsibilities for collective neighborhood initiatives can be quite a challenging task, not only because people taking the initiative feel like carry the burden, but also because collective neighborhood approaches sometimes result in controversy or even conflict among neighbors, as other neighbors do not accept how costs and benefits are distributed. Second, citizens' narratives stress the negative experience that they had with a municipality in the past. They explained that their concerns were not taken seriously and that the procedures were bureaucratic and that it took a lot of time and energy. This disgraces the willingness of citizens to lead or to participate in these collective initiatives. This indicates that future issues of procedural justice in the form of non-participation might be caused by past experiences of misrecognition. We hope to inspire you with our story, and in case you'd like to further discuss our ideas or if you have any suggestions, please be in touch with us.